We're only through week 2 of the regular season and injuries are starting to pile up. If your lineup is decimated and you're looking for help, then you're in the right spot as we kick off week 3 with our running back start and sit analysis. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back into the Fantasy Headliners, and we're going to be talking about running backs this week and what their ceiling and what their floor is and how risky some of these guys may end up being. And for some of you out there, you may need a ton of help this week, and we're going to break down every single matchup to help you set your lineup. And if you're new here, let me give a quick refresher on what these start-sit videos are all about and how you utilize them best. We're going to be going through and taking a look at every player from every matchup, and we're going to first dissect their defensive matchup. What team are they going up against? How many yards do they allow? How many touchdowns do they allow? And how many fantasy points do they allow to that position? And you'll see that matchup meter right below their names. And then we will assign a risk designation. How risky is that play this week? And keep in mind, if a player is super risky, it doesn't mean that they're automatically a sit. It just means that their range of outcomes could end up being super wide, or maybe their ceiling isn't nearly high enough as we would like it to be. And we're going to kick it off on Thursday Night Football, the New England Patriots going up against the New York Jets. And let's talk about Rhamondre Stevenson and the fabulous start that he's had to his year already. Right now, the New York Jets have allowed the 9th most rushing yards to running backs, and Rhamondre Stevenson currently ranks 5th among running backs in rushing yards after week 2 of the season. He's also the RB9 in fantasy. The game plan is clear with the New England Patriots. They want to run the football and utilize the short passing game. 46 attempts through 2 games for Rhamondre Stevenson gives him a really nice floor in a matchup against a team that has had difficulty stopping the run so far. Now, this could end up being a tough matchup for Breece Hall, as the New England Patriots have only allowed 93 rushing yards over the course of their first 2 games to start the year. But the amount of volume that Breece Hall gets makes him a safe bet every single week to have a really nice floor. Currently 2nd among running backs in terms of receptions and tied for 14th in rushing attempts. Now, Braylon Allen could end up being a sneaky flex option over the coming weeks. And unfortunately, the amount of touches he is getting could limit the upside that Breece Hall has. But we know the big play potential is there every single week with Breece Hall. And we know that he's going to get a lot of work in the passing game. And with those 2 things, I'm still willing to give him a low risk rating this week, even in a tougher matchup. And for Braylon Allen, I'm going to put him as a mid-risk, because if they have issues passing the ball this week, Braylon Allen and Breece Hall could really take this game over on the ground. It's clear that Devin Singletary is the lead back in New York, at least for the time being, seeing 20 or more snaps per week than the other running backs on the roster. And yeah, he had a solid game against Washington last week, but unfortunately, Cleveland isn't going to be nearly as easy. And because of that, he's going to get a mid-risk rating. He's definitely not nearly as volatile because of all of the touches that he gets and all the snaps that he plays, but the upside is going to be limited this week. Last week, Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler ran all over the New York Giants, and Jerome Ford would be an easy low-risk start for me if it wasn't for D'Onta Foreman. Now, D'Onta Foreman didn't see as many snaps as Jerome Ford as last week, but he did see more rushing attempts, even though Jerome Ford continues to be the more explosive back. Now, Jerome Ford is going to carry a medium risk just because of D'Onta Foreman cutting into those touches. But if Jerome Ford can find a couple of big plays and even the end zone, he has a shot at least a top 15 running back week in week 3. Now, Foreman is going to carry a high risk. I do think he could potentially find the end zone this week, but I don't know if he'll be as explosive on the ground. So if he sees similar touches to Jerome Ford, he may not put up nearly as many yards, giving him a higher risk setting for me than Ford. Last week, the Tennessee defense gave up 3 total touchdowns to Breece Hall and Braylon Allen for the New York Jets. So now they allow the 11th most fantasy points to the running back position. However, they allow the 10th fewest rushing yards to running backs. There was a lot of concerns last week about Josh Jacobs and his ability to stay efficient in a tough matchup, but he ran the ball 32 times for well over 100 yards and did exactly what we thought he may have done. Now, going up against Tennessee, it definitely could end up being a tougher matchup for him, but he's still going to be a low risk for me because if he carries the ball 30 times once again, it doesn't matter if he averages a little bit on the lower side for yards per attempt and he's not nearly as efficient because the yards will still rack up with that many touches. And if we can find the end zone with Josh Jacobs, it does give him a really solid play for the week, even if his ceiling isn't as high as we would like. Tony Pollard is clearly the lead back in Tennessee, and it's not even close. So all that coach speak before the season started about how this was going to be a 50-50 split, clearly a lie, but we're not shocked. Last week, Tony Pollard played 20 more snaps than Tyjae Spears. He also saw 17 carries compared to Tyjae Spears' 6, and he added 4 targets as well. Now, I do think Tony Pollard could have some inconsistent weeks, and really that's based around the play of Will Levis. But if we can get 15 to 20 touches every single week from Tony Pollard, and he can average 4 yards per carry, he's going to give you a pretty decent floor each and every week. Green Bay has allowed quite a bit of fantasy points to the running back position this year, but a lot of those were in week 1 to Saquon Barkley. So while Tony Pollard may not have a ton of top 12 potential this week, finding himself inside the top 24 is definitely doable. No other defense in the NFL has allowed more rushing yards to begin the season than the Indianapolis Colts. So DeAndre Swift absolutely has top 12 potential. DeAndre Swift has only ran for 48 yards in 2 games. He's averaging 2 yards per carry right now, and the Chicago offense is struggling. Not unprecedented. Yes, Caleb Williams was 1.0 overall in the draft this year, but sometimes rookie quarterbacks just take a while to get adjusted. And that's what's going on with Caleb Williams right now. Everything will likely end up being just fine, but they're banged up at the wide receiver position. Caleb Williams is having a tough time, and it's rendered the running game just barely useless at this point. So while DeAndre Swift has a really great shot to break out this week and have a big game, there's a lot of concerns about how good the Chicago Bears offense is actually going to be in this matchup. Now, on the flip side of things, the Chicago Bears are going to be a much tougher matchup for Jonathan Taylor this week. And yeah, he ran for over 100 yards last week, but I don't know if I see the same thing happening going up against a Bears defense that has allowed the 11th fewest rushing yards to start the year. And JT is definitely a threat to finish inside the top 12. His 4 targets last week keep that as a possibility with a little bit of work in the passing game. But I think it's more likely that Jonathan Taylor finishes as a top 24 back this week with a little bit of a higher ceiling than what we've seen. In fact, over on Underdog, I used my ability to slide his line all the way up to 89.5 and take the under on that. It's a little bit lower as the default line right now over on Underdog, but knowing JT in this offense, I definitely think that he could go over 70-ish yards. But touching 90 is something that I don't think is going to happen. So I'll go lower on his yards this week, even if he still has an overall solid game. Houston and Minnesota is a matchup that we're going to have to keep a close eye on all week long for you Joe Mixon owners, because it feels like there may be some conflicting reports about where he stands after an ankle injury this past week. He ended up leaving the game. He came back. He had 1 rushing attempt after the injury and only ran for 7 yards and then didn't come back in after that. After the game, it sounded like there was a possibility that he could miss some time. And then earlier today, it was announced that the injury may not be as severe as what once thought. And honestly, he could miss very minimal time, if any at all. So we're going to need to keep an eye on how he participates in practice throughout the week and what he's looking like later on. Right now, I'm still going to keep him at a high risk just because we don't know how banged up he truly is. And we don't know if this is some of that coach speak that we talked about earlier in the episode where maybe he is a little bit more banged up than what they're leading on. I mean, San Francisco barely told us that Christian McCaffrey was fine, and now he's on the IR, and no one knows when he's going to be back. And Minnesota isn't going to be the easiest matchup on the ground either. If we find out that Joe Mixon is going to play, play, then he bumps down to a medium risk for me. But I don't know if I'm willing to go down to a low risk given the fact that he is banged up, and I don't know if I trust the Houston Texans when they tell us how healthy he is. The Houston defense has only allowed 75 rushing yards this season, the second fewest of any team in the NFL. And the running backs they shut down during that time were DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor. So it's not like they're going up against just lousy running backs. I guess it depends on what you think about DeAndre Swift though. Not only that, but Jones was outperformed on the ground last week by Ty Chandler. Now, Aaron Jones did see 6 targets, which is always good for helping prop the floor up. And in a matchup like this going up against Houston, I do think they're going to need to utilize Aaron Jones with Jordan Addison still banged up and Justin Jefferson having a quad injury as well. But he's going to need similar work this week. If we want to find a top 12 potential in Aaron Jones, he's going to need 50 or more receiving yards and a touchdown either on the ground or through the air to go with it. And if Ty Chandler were to outperform him again, that's not great for Aaron Jones moving forward. This is definitely a backfield that we need to continue monitoring. Right now, the New Orleans defense currently allows the fewest fantasy points to running backs and the 4th fewest rushing yards to running backs. But here's part of the problem by just looking at those numbers. Opposing teams have not been able to run the football yet because New Orleans has been leading by so many points throughout their first 2 games. So it's absolutely possible that New Orleans' run defense is elite, and they're going to shut down no matter who they play this season. But it's also a possibility that if they face the Eagles this week, who dedicate themselves to the run game, because really, that's what they need to do. You need to keep Derek Carr and the New Orleans offense off the field as much as possible, especially at New Orleans. And if Philadelphia can do that, maybe we find that the rush defense for New Orleans isn't that good. It could still be good, but maybe it's not elite. Saquon Barkley needs to have a day. He needs 25 plus touches on the ground. If Philadelphia can do that and move the football, even if Barkley's ceiling isn't all that high, he should see more than enough touches to still have a pretty decent floor and find the end zone as well. The Eagles have not allowed a rushing touchdown yet this season, so maybe Alvin Kamara doesn't find the end zone as many times as he did last week. But Philadelphia has allowed the 4th most rushing yards to running backs this season. So let's go ahead and lock Alvin Kamara in over on underdog, because his current line of 65.5 rushing yards doesn't seem high enough. So I'm going to go higher with that number and bank on him going over it against the Phillies rush defense that has had some trouble stopping the run so far this season. And even if Alvin Kamara doesn't find the end zone this week, if he goes over on those rushing yards, he has a super safe floor. Maybe he adds a couple of receptions as well, and he's still a top 12 running back regardless. All right, get your NFL season bingo card out and let me know who had J.K. Dobbins leading the NFL in rushing after 2 weeks. I'm sure a lot of you did not. But even with that great performance to start the year, this is going to be the toughest defensive matchup they've had so far, with the Pittsburgh defense allowing the 8th fewest rushing yards to running backs and the 4th fewest fantasy points. And on top of it, Gus Edwards is still seeing more carries than J.K. Dobbins. Now, their splits in terms of snaps, basically even. So he's still out on the field quite a bit. But as far as touches go, Gus Edwards is looking to get more right now. And I'm willing to bet part of the reason why is that Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers staff just wants to keep J.K. Dobbins healthy. They know his upside and his potential. And if they feel like they can make a run to the playoffs this year, J.K. Dobbins is going to be a big part of that. So as much as I would like to throw J.K. Dobbins out there as an easy low-risk start this week, I do think we need to keep in mind that his ceiling could be limited with a tough matchup and the fact that Gus Edwards still continues to see so many carries. Over the course of the first 2 weeks of the season, Najee Harris has seen the 5th most rushing attempts, but he's only averaging 3 yards per carry, and he's only seen 4 targets. That's killing his ceiling. Now, Jaylen Warren was injured right before the beginning of the year, and because of that, we didn't know how much he was actually going to end up playing. In fact, it was thought that Jaylen Warren was going to end up missing a few weeks, but in week 2, Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris played the same amount of snaps. So while Najee Harris may still continue to see a little bit of a better floor than Jaylen Warren, Jaylen Warren, when he's finally fully healthy, which he may be close to as of right now, we're going to start seeing that efficiency and that upside show up once again. This is not going to be a great matchup for Najee Harris to find his ceiling based on how he's performed so far. So we really need to keep an eye on Jaylen Warren this week. And if his workload increases or they get him working in the passing game a little bit more, whatever it may end up being, then we know where we're trending with this backfield. And maybe just like last year, Najee Harris will get the most touches and because of that have the best floor, but Jaylen Warren with his upside and efficiency will have the highest ceiling every single week. And as of right now, it does look like Justin Fields will be starting once again. Right now, the Broncos running back room is the exact definition on why it's so hard to do this job. Because things change from week to week, and because we're not in those situation rooms with these NFL teams, we have no idea what they're doing behind the scenes. Just like week 1 for the Denver Broncos. Everyone was caught off guard. Jaleel McLaughlin was the main running back, and Javonte Williams was actually the passing back. We had that flip-flopped. Almost everybody in the industry did, and I didn't see anybody saying that Jaleel McLaughlin was going to be the lead back and Williams was just going to be the pass-catching guy. And then in week 2, that all of a sudden changes. Javonte Williams saw more carries, he was on the field more often, and he saw 5 targets. Jaleel McLaughlin didn't see any targets. Why the change? Was it game script? Was it premeditated? Do they plan on doing this through the first few weeks of the season where they're trying both running backs and seeing who fits what role better? Is it because of Bo Nix? Is it because how inefficient the offense is so far? So many question marks right now with Denver's offense. And because of that, it makes this entire team risky to even think about, let alone put in your lineup. This seems like a classic Rachaad White big game. He's been terrible to start the year, but maybe out of nowhere, all of a sudden he puts together a huge game. He gets the same type of receiving work that he saw in week 1. And he goes off on the ground. It just feels like he could do that to us this week. But that doesn't mean that he's still not one of the riskiest running backs that you could put in your lineup for week 3. After only 23 total yards on 11 total touches in week 2 against Detroit, his average yards per carry is down to 2.0 for the season, which I wrote about it in the draft guide. I know people continue to be like, you hate Rachaad White and you have a vendetta against him. And I really don't. I'm telling you the same thing every single week. He's volume dependent. He's touchdown dependent. His efficiency continues to suck every single week. But like I said, maybe this is the week that he gets back on track. I'll probably mention this in every show this week when I talk about Carolina. Bryce Young is not the main problem in Carolina. There are other issues. And I don't think this switch to Andy Dalton is all of a sudden going to make this offense super explosive. However, it may potentially give it a little bit more upside with how much that Bryce Young was actually struggling. Maybe the veteran presence will get some of these guys going a little bit and just change the overall morale of what they're currently looking at. Now, Chuba Hubbard has a really good matchup this week. The Las Vegas Raiders allow the 5th most rushing yards in the NFL to start the season. And last week, he ran for 64 yards on 10 carries. He looked a little bit more explosive, closer to what we saw at the end of last season. So even though I'm giving him a medium risk this week, I do think Chuba Hubbard has some great flex potential for owners that are dealing with injuries or just need somebody to help out. Zamir White has been absolutely awful so far, and this is his last shot. I don't care that it's week 3. I tried to tell everybody all offseason long that Zamir White was not the guy that they thought he was. So in this matchup, going up against Carolina, who hasn't been able to stop a running back in almost 2 years now, he needs to have a day. And I'm not just talking about a decent fantasy day. He needs to have a top 12 day. Right now, Carolina is allowing the 2nd most rushing yards, the 2nd most touchdowns, and the 2nd most fantasy points to the running back position. We need Zamir White to hop on his horse and go. We need him to have a top 12 week, and he needs to show us that what happened at the end of last season and why we drafted him is more capable of happening moving forward. But so far to begin the year, he hasn't shown us any of that, and I'm not shocked. Well, we'll continue to wait on Raheem Mostert and word of when he'll make it back out on the field. But until then, those of you that invested heavily in De'Von Achane at his ADP are absolutely loving what they see over the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, I never doubted Achane when it came to his explosiveness or the offense that he plays in. It all has to do with the injury potential. How could he hold up over the course of 17 full games? And after 1 week, he was already banged up. There was a lot of concern about whether he would even suit up last week. Now, the good news is he gets a little bit of extra rest this week coming off of Thursday Night Football. So hopefully he's ready to go in a matchup where the Dolphins are going to rely heavily on him. In fact, De'Von Achane is a top 5 running back this week. Would not shock me, even if Raheem Mostert makes it back. Seattle's defense has been good this season. They still allow the 7th most rushing yards to the running back position. And with Skylar Thompson at quarterback over Tua, it wouldn't shock me if Achane sees 20 plus touches with some high upside in week 3. Kenneth Walker looks like he is set to miss his 2nd straight week. All indications are he will not be able to come back, and we'll check in as the week goes on in case any of that changes. But Zach Charbonnet, who I thought was a really good play last week and only a touchdown kind of saved that, is in a good situation this week as well, but hopefully he can produce a little bit more. Miami is allowing the 4th most rushing yards to running backs right now, and the matchup through the air for the Seattle offense is way more difficult than it was last week. Zach Charbonnet should see a decent amount of carries. Hopefully he gets a little bit more work in the passing game, and if he takes advantage of it, top 15 potential could absolutely be there. When you were younger, did you ever backtalk your dad, say something super stupid and get one of those back of the head, across the face, whatever it may be? We've all been there. We've all done it. Well, the majority of us anyway. And that's exactly what happened this past weekend to the Dallas Cowboys. The New Orleans Saints and Alvin Kamara became the Dallas Cowboys' daddy and smacked him across the back of the head. Now, is the Dallas defense that bad? I don't think so, but it is really troubling to see them not be able to stop Alvin Kamara and give up that many touchdowns. Derrick Henry doesn't have the highest ceiling to begin the year, but once again, last week in week 2, he showed a really nice floor, and that's why we invested a 3rd round pick in Derrick Henry, where his ADP was all offseason long, because of his floor and because of the ability to honestly average a touchdown every single game of the season. Derrick Henry has an opportunity to take care of a defense that is down after last week. But there's also the possibility that Dallas bounces back, shows how they did in week 1, and that this defense really is as good as people thought it would be coming into the season, and Derrick Henry loses a little bit of that ceiling. But I'll take the touchdown regardless, and I still think that he's a guy that can find at least 10 fantasy points easy. I'm going to double down on my Mando must avoid this week, and I'm actually going to avoid 2 running backs, Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle from the Dallas Cowboys. I am not loving this matchup, and I am staying away from it the same exact way I need Oder to stay away from me. And during a tough football season when I'm constantly working and coaching and running kids all over the place, I need some advanced protection from Mando that can help eliminate odors for up to 72 hours. And if you're interested in getting your hand on some Mando products for a cheap price, then use our code word headliners when you head on over to shopmando.com, because you're going to get $5 off their starter pack, which is essentially 40% off. That is a great deal, and you should experience the same type of odor control that the Headliner team does during a season when we're constantly sweating it out. The Baltimore defense has allowed a season-low 74 rushing yards to opposing running backs this season. And while the Cowboys really didn't have the ability to get anything going on the ground because they were being blown out last week, I'm still not impressed with this running back room. Rico Dowdle looked a little bit better last week, but are they going to give him more touches? Zeke still doesn't look great. He had a touchdown in week 1, averaged 4 yards per carry, but still didn't give you a ton of volume. I'm staying away from both of these guys in a super tough matchup this week, where more than likely Dallas is going to need to throw the football to keep up with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm skipping Zeke and Dowdle. At best, I think Zeke finds a touchdown and maybe gives you around 10 fantasy points with that touchdown, and maybe Dowdle can find a couple of big runs. Maybe he can find a couple of passes through the air, but other than that, I'm not expecting much in terms of upside. And the award for most injured players in a matchup goes to San Francisco and the LA Rams. San Francisco is going to be missing Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel this week. The Los Angeles Rams are going to be missing Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp this week. That's a whole lot of fantasy points and a whole lot of star power in one game. The running game, though, should still be pretty decent on either side of the ball, and Jordan Mason could be in for another big game. The Rams offense has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points, 3rd most rushing touchdowns, and 3rd most rush yards to running backs this season. And Jordan Mason has been hot to start the year. And Deebo Samuel has been seeing some touches in the backfield, trying to get him utilized all over the place. That's not going to happen this week. Jordan Mason is essentially all by himself, 20 plus touches, 20 plus carries, going up against a defense that has been absolutely slaughtered by the run game so far this year. Jordan Mason is a great bet to win you a fantasy week. For Kyren Williams, it all hinges on the Los Angeles Rams keeping the game script close. Stay in a neutral game script or only see yourself down by maybe a couple of scores here or there. If you start going down by multiple scores like you did last week, Kyren Williams is probably headed back to the bench for Blake Corum once again. But at least to start the game in a tougher matchup, the Rams are going to have to run the football. There's no way Matthew Stafford can throw the football 40, 45, 50 times this week with the injuries that they have right now at the wide receiver position. You have to stay balanced, you have to control the game flow, and you have to keep the ball in your hands as long as possible. And you do that by giving it to Kyren Williams. The ceiling may not be great, but as long as they can get in the red zone, he has a really good opportunity to score. The Detroit offense does not look like itself to begin the year. Unfortunately, Jared Goff looks rusty. It looks like the offensive line really hasn't gotten their feet under them as of yet. And really, Monty and Gibbs, they've had decent starts to the year. Jameson Williams has had a good start. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he had a big bounce back last week. So we'll see, hopefully, this offense continues to push forward. And hopefully, they can actually get the ball in the end zone more often this week. But Monty and Gibbs are going to continue to be low-risk players every single week. And it's because of the offense that they play in. They don't stop running the football. They keep pounding the football over and over, regardless of the score, and they try to wear you down. And in this matchup, going up against the Arizona Cardinals, you need to control the game. Keep Kyler Murray off the field. Don't let Marvin Harrison Jr. have a day against your secondary. Run the ball with Monty, run the ball with Gibbs, have yourself an absolute terrific day in terms of keeping the ball in your possession and wearing down the Cardinals, and you'll end up being just fine. Gibbs continues to have great upside. He does things in the pass game. He does things on the ground. He said in week 2, he felt way more healthy, and in week 3, he should be even better. For David Montgomery, we saw it last week. Even if the ceiling doesn't get as high as Gibbs, he has the ability to find the end zone every single week, given the fact that Detroit finds themselves in the red zone and utilizes Montgomery so well in those situations. As rough as it is watching the Lions secondary this time, their front line and their run defense is absolutely no joke. They've been shutting down opposing running backs since week 1 last season. In fact, when Gus Edwards found the end zone 3 times with a big run against them on that blowout loss last season, I can't think of too many big games from running backs since then. And James Conner and this offense is coming off a fantastic week. But this is a much different run defense than they faced last week. And Detroit is going to be coming after James Conner. And if he doesn't find some big runs, he's going to have a real tough time finding his ceiling in week 3 against this defense. Through the first 2 weeks of the year after facing Rachaad White and Kyren Williams, both top 12 running backs last year, they're allowing the second second fewest fantasy points to the running back position and the 5th fewest rushing yards. I think it's going to probably be best to just stay away from the Kansas City Chiefs backfield here in week 3. Not only is it going to be a tougher matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, who've done a really good job against running backs to start the year, but it's also a cause of concern for who's actually going to be utilized. Carson Steele feels like he's going to be the first guy up, but they brought in Samaje Perine, who saw some work in the passing game during the first couple of weeks and could split time with Carson Steele 50-50. Also, as of this recording, Kareem Hunt was coming in for a visit, but nothing had been decided yet. By the time this video comes out, maybe they sign him. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's just Steele and Perine. Maybe we focus on Perine and his ability to help in the passing game. But I don't know if I'm going to be diving headlong into either of these running backs. Now, here's the tough part. If you own Isaiah Pacheco and you need help and you're focusing on somebody in your waiver wire, you're going to have to pick them up and probably play with the fact that you don't know who the starter is going to be, and it's a tough matchup this week. So if you're grabbing Carson Steele, it's not going to be for this week. If you're grabbing Samaje Perine, probably not going to be for this week. This could end up being a 50-50 split backfield the rest of the way until Isaiah Pacheco is expected to come back. He is expected to make a return this year after having surgery on the fibula, but really nobody knows when that may be. Bijan had a super solid week against Philadelphia in week 2, but I still think he's lacking some of that upside that we consistently need to see for him to be a low-risk start in this matchup that is going to be tough against the Kansas City Chiefs defense. The Chiefs have allowed the 6th fewest rushing yards to begin the season, so Bijan this week, especially if it's a negative game script, needs to be included in the passing game. And for him to end up inside the top 12, I also believe he's going to have to find the end zone. If we can get him 5 catches, if we can go 40 to 50 yards or more and a touchdown, top 12 is absolutely there. But if he doesn't hit either of those milestones, we're probably looking at a week where he's more in that 15 to 20 range and gives you a decent floor more than he gives you a decent ceiling. The numbers for the Buffalo Bills defense against running backs are super interesting because as rushing yards go, they're right in the middle of the pack. They really haven't allowed a ton of rushing yards yet to begin this season, but they have allowed the 2nd most receiving yards to running backs. And because of that and the touchdowns that they have allowed, this is a top 10 matchup for Travis Etienne in the passing game. And that's exactly where he could help out to find his ceiling this week. It is a tough matchup in the secondary for this Jacksonville wide receiver core. And if they're going to move the football and they're going to score, they've got to get Travis Etienne going in the passing game. And hopefully he can pick up some big plays. If he does, we could see some of that top 12 work that we saw last season. And if Jacksonville can get in the goal line, Travis Etienne will be the main back there as well. I don't think it's going to be a huge day by any means, but if they include him in the passing game, it could definitely be one of the better days that we've seen from Travis Etienne since early last year. If you're tuning into this portion of the video, it's because you either A, own James Cook, or B, you want to see what I'm going to say this week after the huge blunder of listing him as a must avoid in week 2. Well, guess what? Headliner Nation, if you love this channel and you've been around for a while, you're also going to love what I'm about to say, and you're going to appreciate it. If you're a hater back to talk some smack, welcome back. But close your eyes and ears because I'm about ready to lay a little truth on you. Once again, I'm going to admit I was 100% wrong with my prediction of James Cook last week, but I was not wrong in my analysis of James Cook. My prediction that he was not going to have any big plays and that I was avoiding him was inaccurate. But if you were to go back and listen to last week's episode, I talked about his big playability unlocking his ceiling, and that if he didn't do that, that is why I would be concerned, and I didn't think that he would do that. Well, here's what ended up happening last Thursday. James Cook had 1 target in the passing game. He had 1 reception. It went for 17 yards and a touchdown. Big play number 1. James Cook had a 49-yard rushing touchdown. Big play number 2. those were the big plays to unlock his ceiling. Remember when I talked about that's what he would needed to reach his full potential? He got those, and I was wrong about that. But what about the rest of the game? The rest of the game, if you remove those two big plays, James Cook only ran for 29 yards on 10 carries and 1 touchdown. He averaged 2.9 yards per carry outside of that big run, and he would have only scored 8.9 fantasy points last week. If he had only scored 8.9 fantasy points last week, he would have been the running back 28, and he would have been a guy that is our running back 1 or running back 2 we would have needed to avoid. The process is there. The process was correct, and the analysis was correct. Unfortunately, Buffalo were able to get him those big plays. And when I say unfortunately, I don't mean that for owners that played him. If you had him in your lineup, he probably helped you win your week. That's awesome. I'm happy for that, especially if you were here watching and you didn't listen because you went with your gut. I love it because that's what you should always do. But in hindsight, I wasn't wrong about James Cook. I was just wrong about the prediction. And that's going to continue to happen from time to time. But I feel like this was a really important conversation for us to have once again, because that's the dangers of just looking at a box score and just looking at fantasy points and not really diving in those underlying stats that really help us tell the entire story. And that's why James Cook this week in this matchup, once again, is a medium risk. Because last week, he needed those big plays to give you the output that he did. This week, maybe he needs those big plays again. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he is much more efficient and plays the entire game with that type of upside. And I hope he does. But if we continue to see the big play reliance, it is going to make him vulnerable on a weekly basis. But because we had some fun with my big miss last week and we put out a video about it, we also told everybody that as an apology to the community, we were going to give away a $50 gift card for one of the best comments on that video roasting me. And I found the one that I liked the best. And considering he was my Mando must avoid, my winner is going to be Color94, who left the comment, Kyle's prediction was so bad, even Mando would struggle to cover up that stink. Color, I appreciate you. I appreciate you having some fun on the video. Make sure you shoot us an email, info@thefantasyheadliners.com. Use the email address associated with your YouTube account you commented from, and we'll get you that Visa gift card sent right away. Brian Robinson is looking terrific to start the year, and everyone that was worried about Austin Ekeler either being the running back 1 or taking away too many touches from Brian Robinson didn't have anything to worry about. He's clearly the #1 back, and he has shown it to begin the year. And now he gets a pretty decent matchup going up against Cincinnati, who has allowed the 7th most rushing yards over the first 2 weeks of the season. Brian Robinson has the 8th most rushing yards among running backs to begin the season. He's going to continue to have a safe floor. He is the primary back on the ground. He's getting a little bit of work through the air as well, which definitely helps raise that floor. But in a matchup like this, he absolutely could end up having a really solid day. Watching Zach Moss average 3.7 yards per carry to start the season is rough. Watching this offense with no T. Higgins to begin the season is rough. Watching Chase Brown be underutilized when he could help in both of those areas is even more rough. I mean, the dude got less than 5 touches last game. You don't have Tyler Boyd back from last year. You don't have T. Higgins right now. And Zach Moss has been highly inefficient to start the year. But what do we expect? This is an offense and a coaching staff that underutilized and didn't utilize Joe Mixon correctly for years. So maybe the joke's on us for thinking they would finally figure it out. Zach Moss just isn't looking great right now. You got to hope for a touchdown every single week. Not the best matchup in the world for him, and maybe sooner or later they'll get Chase Brown going. If that happens, awesome. But if not, he's going to become a drop candidate really soon. Yo, Headliner Nation, there you have it. All of my start and sit analysis for the running back position for week 3. Make sure you hit that like button for me, and in the comments down below, let me know how much the start and sit analysis is helping you so far to begin 2024. Absolutely love what we're doing right now, and I hope that you're loving it as well. but I've got a ton of other stuff that I've got to do. Wide receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks still to come. Make sure you subscribe right now if you haven't already. And if you are subscribed and haven't done so yet, turn on the bell notification. Anytime we drop new content, you'll know about it right away. For now though, Headliner Nation, I hope you all stay safe and stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.